The Rebbe starts off the Sikha by saying that one of the Maimori Razal that bring out the amazing Maila, the amazing advantage of Matan Torah is a Gemara Masechta Pesachim that tells us that Rabbi Yosef on Shavuos would make a special feast. He said, if not for this day that it caused it, how many Yosefs would there be in the marketplace? Says the Rebbe, one of the questions that are asked on this Gemara immediately is, what does he mean with these words, Hayoim, this day? He certainly means the idea of learning Torah, as Rashi explains. So why does he use the expression, if not for this day? Why doesn't he just say, if not for Torah? Furthermore, if he's actually speaking about the idea of Limudat Torah, well, Limudat Torah, learning Torah, happened even before Matan Torah. The others were already learning Torah. Another thing we need to understand is, what's this expression, the Kagorim, if not for this day, that it caused? Why not just if not for this day? Now you might say that what Rabbi Yosef is referring to is the fact that Hashem chose the Yidden from all the nations on this day of Matan Torah. We're not only speaking about the learning of Torah itself. And maybe that's what he means with, if not for Torah, if not for this day, the Kagorim that caused, because he's trying to emphasize not only the idea of Torah, but the idea of this distinction between the Yidden and all the rest of the world. But the Rebbe is saying it's difficult to say this because Rashi says clearly, on these words, if not for this day, Rashi says, Shalamadati Torah, that I learned Torah. And also the whole Gemara is speaking really about the special quality and the amazing things of Torah. And furthermore, there wouldn't be any distinction then between Rabbi Yosef and any other Yid, because all the Yidden were chosen together. But it sounds like there's something unique about Rabbi Yosef over here. Some other things that Rebbe says we need to understand is, why does Rabbi Yosef use the expression, if not for this day, how many Yosefs there would have been? Why not just how many other people there would have been? Also, why this expression specifically, Beshuka, in the marketplace? So the Rebbe says the explanation is, we know that generally the difference between the learning of Torah and the fulfillment of mitzvahs before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah is that before Matan Torah, it was in a way that we weren't commanded to do it, and after Matan Torah, we're commanded to do it. And the chiddush of this is not only regarding the person that's doing the mitzvah or learning the Torah, but mainly in the object that the mitzvah is being done with. That is, that before Matan Torah, because we were not doing it, we were doing it with our own koyach, not because Hashem commands us. Therefore, we don't have the ability to actually transform an object to become a chefza shel mitzvah, an object, an item of a mitzvah. It's only regarding the person himself that he was commanded to do it, but not that the item is in any way transformed. On the other hand, after Matan Torah, we have this chiddush that we can now transform the very item itself with which we do the mitzvah or the aveira, chas v'shalom, rachmana litzlan. So when a yid does a mitzvah, that means he now made this object itself into a chefza shel mitzvah, and so to in regards to an aveira, where he actually caused that the aveira, the item should now be a more despicable item. Says the Rebbe, of course, with this we also explain the idea of why Avraham Avinu, when it comes to administering an oath, asking Eliezer to make a promise, he says, Simno yotcha tachas yirechi, referring to the mitzvah of Milah. Why is he specifically using this mitzvah? What about other mitzvahs that he has done before? And the explanation is that this is the very only mitzvah that Avraham Avinu was actually commanded on, and therefore this item is a chefza shel kedusha as opposed to anything else. Says the Rebbe, this is what Rabbi Yosef now means. If ilav hayoim, if not for this day, kama Yosef ika b'shuka. What he means is like this: before Matan Torah, of course we learn Torah, and the general idea of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs is a concept of Yosef, which means there's a certain haisafa and kedusha happening, rather than the world the way it was on its own. But kama Yosef ika b'shuka means that the whole haisafa of kedusha that would have happened before is not in the world itself. The world itself is not being transformed by it. The world is remaining the shuk, the world is remaining an outside world, just like before the mitzvah was done. Because it was more about the person doing the mitzvah rather than the item itself. But as a result of this day, the day of Matan Torah, now we cause that the Hisofa should be, the Yosef should be Beshuka, meaning transforming the Shuk itself, transforming the world itself to become a place of holiness. Says the Rebbe, with this we'll also understand why Rashi, when he explains what Rabbi Yosef was saying, he says, Shalamadati Torah, v'nisroi mamti, and I was elevated. What does he mean by v'nisroi mamti? Because that's what we're speaking about. We're speaking about that just like the items which we do a mitzvah become elevated as a result of Matan Torah, so too the person himself becomes completely elevated, transformed because of the learning Torah, which is something that really happens only after Matan Torah. Says the Rebbe, now we'll also start understanding what Rav Yosef means with the expression, the kagorim, that this day has caused. Because the Rebbe is now going to explain what happens with Matan Torah on another level, in addition to the fact, once we do the mitzvah with an item, it becomes holy, there's something else that happens over here. that really before Matan Torah there was no geder of isur or mitzvah within the object itself of the matters of the world. In other words, we wouldn't say about any sort of object that it itself is inherently asur, that there's an aveira about it, or that there's a certain mitzvah that can be applied to it. Every item was just an item of the world itself. The whole mitzvah, again, was only on the person himself. The Rebbe gives an example for this idea. Avraham Avinu doesn't do the bris. Why doesn't he do the bris? So one of the explanations is that before the Eibishter gives the bris, then the orla, the skin that's covering the milah, the part that's circumcised, is not even considered orla. It's just like any piece of meat, any piece of skin. So in other words, there's no geder even of a mitzvah that can be applied to this area. And therefore Avraham Avinu cannot do this mitzvah. And the same thing after Matan Torah, that just like we understand when it comes to an isur, that this item is actually also, there's something wrong with it, there's something inherently wrong with it, that Hashem doesn't want it. In the same way, we understand with the mitzvah, even before we do the mitzvah with the item, before we bring the kedusha down into the mitzvah, this item itself has already a certain element of a mitzvah applied to it. It's called already a chefzer or mitzvah, an item with which a mitzvah could be done. Obviously, it's not on the same level as once we're going to do the mitzvah with it. So for example, the Daled Minim, there's something special about it even before we do the mitzvah, or tefillin. Once we do the mitzvah, of course, it's going to be on a much higher level. With this, the Rebbe says, we could actually explain something that seems to be a bit strange in a Mechilta, which we also say in the Haggadah. On the Pasuk, V'yigadet levincha b'yemahu leimar ba'avurza os Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim, that on Pesach we tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the Mechilta says, perhaps we could start telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim already on Rosh Chodesh. And the Rebbe explains that the reason, why would we think from Rosh Chodesh? And the Rebbe explains that the reason why we think from Rosh Chodesh is because since the Eibishter commanded already on Rosh Chodesh, when the Yidden were in Mitzrayim, for the mitzvahs of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, this would get us to think that perhaps, because the Eibishter gave this mitzvah already, in other words, there's a certain geder of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror already, so now we can already start telling the story, already applies the inyanim of Pesach, once the Eibishter gave these mitzvahs in the world. Or at least maybe on Erev Pesach, when we have the Korban Pesach already, there's already a Metzias of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Says the Mechilta, no, we actually have to wait till B'poyel Mamush we're doing the mitzvahs. In other words, what we still see from this whole idea is that the moment the Eibishter commands us about something, there's already a geder, there's an item of a mitzvah already. Of course, once we do the mitzvah, it's at a much, much higher level. Says the Rebbe, now we're also going to understand what Rabbi Yosef meant with saying, Yilav hayoyim the Kagarim, that this is what he means. That, in other words, it's not only speaking about the actual learning Torah of doing mitzvahs itself. We're speaking about what the day of Matan Torah caused, is that there's already a geder, first of all, of things with which a mitzvah can be done, an item with which a mitzvah can be done, and so too in regards to the Yidden, that they became like a geir, they became like converts, that they are now also, again, a much greater kedusha inside of them, and therefore they are capable to bring the kedusha of the items into them when they actually go ahead and do a mitzvah. The next thing the Rebbe addresses is why is it specifically Rabbi Yosef the one that said it? There were many Tanoim and Amiroim before Rabbi Yosef. And in order to explain this, the Rebbe is going to focus on the idea that Rabbi Yosef was actually blind. And what the Rebbe says is that really we can have the following question. When we say that Matan Torah caused that the items of the world themselves can be completely transformed right now, there's a geder of a mitzvah applied to it, and we can bring the kedusha into it. Is this only true regarding someone that was commanded to do the mitzvah, which you might think, because that's the point of Matan Torah, now we're commanded? Or is this true even someone that's not commanded to do the mitzvah? If he does the mitzvah, he's still bringing down the same level of kedusha. The examples would be a woman that's not chayiv in certain mitzvahs and does them nevertheless, or a blind person, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is potter from all the mitzvahs in the Torah. So what about the mitzvahs that he does go ahead and do? So the Rebbe says like this, Rabbi Yosef, in the Gemara says, there's a Gemara that says as follows. He says, originally, I said to people, if someone's going to tell me that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that a blind person is potter from a mitzvahs, I would make a big feast, I would be very happy, because even though I'm not chayiv in mitzvahs, I'm still doing them. But then when I heard that a mitzvah v'ois, if you're commanded to do something, there's more reward, I would obviously much rather that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, and that a person that's blind is chayiv in mitzvahs. What do we see from here? That first of all, Rabbi Yosef is not sure whether the halacha is that a blind person is chayiv or not. And also, that if a blind person is part of mitzvahs, Rabbi Yosef would understand this in the mean that it means he's completely exempt from mitzvahs. So we say now we can understand why Rabbi Yosef is so excited about Shavuos. He says, if not for this day, Ilav hayoyim de kagarim kama Yosef ika b'shuka. And what's the chiddush over here? In other words, the way he sees it is that yes, the fact that Yidden got this amazing kedusha b'matan Torah means that they became, and so too the items in the world became a geder of a mitzvah because of the Eibishter's command. This causes that even someone like Rabbi Yosef, someone that's blind, is elevated to a level where even if he's not commanded specifically to do this mitzvah, but he could now also achieve a special kedusha within the item of the mitzvah, because after Matan Torah, all of these things now became actions of mitzvahs. In other words, the items themselves became items that a mitzvah could be applied to, that the kedusha of mitzvah could be applied to. The Rebbe now asks, but wouldn't you say that's nevertheless a mitzvah v'oisa, still going to be mamshech, a greater level of kedusha into it than someone that's not commanded? Plus, weren't there any other blind people before Rabbi Yosef as well? And the Rebbe says that Rabbi Yosef had something unique about him. The Gemara refers to him as Sinai, someone that had a tremendous knowledge of all the Mishnayos, of all the halachos, and so on and so forth. He was appointed to be the Rosh Yeshiva because of that. And therefore, even according to the opinion that he would be potter from the mitzvahs, Rabbi Yosef is still saying, Yilav hayoyim de kagarim, because what he's saying is, since everyone has to come on to him for his halachas, for his instructions and so on, so even those people that are mitzvah voisa, so therefore he ends up benefiting also from those people to be able to be mamshech this same level of kedusha, even if he personally was not chayiv, but because he is teaching all this Torah to everyone else. And the Rebbe says, of course, this is all very much tied in with the beer of Chassidus, that the avos before Matan Torah, all of the great things that they were doing was all more beruchni yishayin yanim. After Matan Torah, we could be mamshech the Torah and the mitzvahs, the kedusha and the item of the mitzvah. And the Rebbe explains that more specifically, there's three levels based on everything we're saying. Number one is the fact that now there's an item of a mitzvah with which the mitzvah can be done, is number one. A higher thing is when we're actually going ahead and actually preparing the item right now to go ahead and do the mitzvah with it. And finally, when we do the mitzvah, b'poyel mamish, bringing down the highest level of kedusha.